So I got plenty of you here, so I'll try to not fail you. I thought that I'm going to have 30 minutes. I'm going to have about 20, 25, so I'll make it shorter and I will make it longer. I'm Jack, as you can see, but that's boring. And let's get to the stuff. It seems like you're interested in this subject, which is Gulp as a better Grunt. Automate your front-end web development workflow fully. And well, first, we will tell something about front-end developers' workflow, then something about Grunt, and then finally we'll go into the details of Gulp. So the first question is, what is the front-end developers' workflow? Well, we can divide it in a couple of phases. Like, for example, when you start our project and in front-end, first we have a setup phase. We make some research, or maybe look for some documentation, ask friends, and then finally we download the libraries that we want to use and add it to our project. And maybe also install some scaffold, maybe controllers or scaffold views that we are going to use throughout the whole our application. And later on, when we develop our application, we want a couple of things that will help us, like watching the changes. So maybe you want our browser to reload the changes automatically, or we can do it manually. We can also use, for example, tools like JS Hint that I will show us if we have any errors in code. Maybe it's badly indented or something. Also, maybe you want to compile if we use some syntaxes like CoffeeScript, Sass, Jade, and also maybe run some tests and stuff like that. And finally, when we write some code and we want to commit the code, or maybe even deploy it to the production, we again compile. We have something to compile. Maybe run final tests, maybe integration tests if you have some. Then maybe you want to compress our site and maybe concatenate all the files so we won't have the 20 requests when we visit the website, but only 3, which is HTML, JS, and CSS. We don't need anything else. And finally, we want to deploy it. And well, how did it look like a couple of years ago? A short lesson of history about front-end development. Let's get back to, for example, 2011, which isn't that far, but because it was about 3 years ago, 4 years ago, about. And let's see, how did the setup phase look like at that time? Well, when we wanted to download some library and add it to the browser, well, we just Google it. Like, for example, jQuery, we Googled for jQuery, and then we visit the website, so look for the newest stable version, we download it and add it to the project. We need something else, like, for example, we need autocomplete in our website, no problem. We Google for it, we choose, for example, jQuery UI, and add it to our website. The similar way, we download the newest stable version. We remember that we have jQuery also, we need to have installed as it's the dependency of jQuery UI. And keep it going. If you want to enlarge the image when you click on it, because client demands it, well, okay, we look for the library, choose one of them, and download it, add it to application. And finally, when you have all this stuff, we can just add it to the index HTML page, like every line of code. And well, we didn't compile anything at that time. You ask about minification or concatenation. Well, even so, if you want to, you can just do it every time you deploy. We had tools like online JavaScript compression tool. So you could do it every time you deploy something to the production. You ask about deployment. Well, if we weren't using SVN or Git, well, you could just deploy it manually with ftpools and this beautiful program. And well, testing. What testing? We don't do testing, right? My code works, right? And if it doesn't, well, I can just test it manually. Yeah, that was the attitude of 2010. Maybe it was decent back then, but now it only gives you a facepalm. Like, we shouldn't do it anymore, because now we got 2014, and since 2 years we got tools like, from the left, Bower, Yeoman, and Grunt, and they help us a lot while we develop application and make our development much faster. And to give a short brief about these tools, Bower help us to download these project dependencies and libraries. Whenever we want to use some library, like for this example, jQuery, we can just paste one command into our command line or shell we can just say bower install jQuery, and we got it downloaded, and it's in our directory. And if we add --dash save, then, well, it's just written down to our bower JSON file, so whenever somebody else downloads our repository code, then you can choose paste bower install, and the dependencies, all this stuff is installed. So it's really helpful, and I think, how many of you uses that? Or okay, most of you, that's great. Further on, we have Yeoman, which helped us a lot at the beginning of our project, maybe later also, but especially on the beginning. For example, this presentation, which is made in Bespoke framework, which is only HTML and JavaScript, well, it was generated by Yeoman generator Bespoke. And all you need to do such a presentation is 3 things. Install your Node.js, install that generator, and then just call your Bespoke. It asks you a simple question like, what is the name of your project and stuff like that. And after that, you have your application environment ready. You also have it configured with Grunt or Gulp. And you could just say Gulp serve, because somebody configured it for us, and we can just use it. And then I just written down the code of this presentation in Jade, which was compiled to HTML. I didn't need to set up this presentation. It was already done, thanks to other people and by open source. And it doesn't also only help on the beginning, but also it helps us later on when we, for example, use some controllers or views, then we can just generate some scaffold controllers. And last but not least, we have Grunt, which have helped us for long to automate our development. If we have our Grunt file configured properly, then we can just say Grunt or Grunt server, and we have all that stuff like compiling, watching for changes, reloading, having the HTTP server, maybe running tests whenever we change something. We have that automated. So the only thing we do then is to write in our code. And if you're developers, then I think that is the thing we should do, right? And well, this is how front-end workflow looks like today. Like, we can generate some web application with Yeoman. If we want to use some libraries, then we can just install it with Bower. And later on, we can, instead of pasting it in the index HTML directly, because it's wrong, we can just use the Grunt and its Grunt concat plugin to just concatenate all the files into one vendor file. And later on, it's the only file that we inject into our index.html. Or we can use 2 files like app and vendor files. And Grunt plugins are almost, like, their possibilities are almost limitless. They do a lot of stuff. Like, these are the examples that are really useful and like used all the time in frontend. For example, minification of files. So it's compressed when we landed production, so the user doesn't download so much. Also, we can compile other syntaxes, which are probably much more effective in work, like CoffeeScript, Sass, Jade, Stylus, whatever. We can use automatically JS hint or tools like that see if our code is well indented or stuff like that. We can watch files for changes, and whenever something is changed, then we reload it in browser automatically. Of course, run a server. We can run tests every time we change something, or just manually with one command. We can add some licensing for something. We can compile into HTML templates into one JavaScript file. That's really useful lately in Angular's application or other single-page applications. We can use source maps. So even if you use syntaxes like Sass, we can see, and we want to debug it into the browser, we can see the exact source, even if it's minified or merged with other files. We can compress images automatically, move some files, directories if we want to, and deploy it to the server finally. All the stuff we can automate, and we definitely should automate it. And it was really fun, and it was really helped me a lot. And I've been also using it for a long time. And how many of you have used or is using Grunt? Can you show me? Oh, great. So I just skipped to the gold part, I think. And well, it was fun. But when you had your project larger, like for 1 year, and you held all that stuff like compilation files, the running tests, concatenation, having multiple environments, and all that stuff, then after some time you see that your Grunt file was just like a big bunch of spaghetti code. Because here I can show you an example. This is just like my project from last year, I think. It's a Grunt file. It's not really old because it's written down in lineman, which is a wrapper on the Grunt, but doesn't really change the point because it's really similar. And you can see it. Here are the list of tasks I'm using, like JTemplates, compilation, copying some files like player here, maybe compressing some images. And here I configure the task. And well, the configuration of plugins is clear already, I think. It's just a couple, it's a matter of couple lines, like here is the configuration of the server, I can configure the port. Here I configure the SAS plugin, which will compile something with source maps. Here I configure my Jade plugin, which compiles some Jade templates to HTML. I have multiple directories, so I defined 3 tasks for this plugin. Here I have also some pages compilation. Here I copy my templates from one directory to another. Maybe some files like assets or htaccess or things like that. Maybe I have some Flash files still, sorry. Then I just copy them and all the stuff. And as you can see, well, the configuration of plugins is rather clear, I think, but it's a lot. And well, you can see what the plugin does, but if you ask me what does the scripts task do, then it has about 4 plugins because I need to compile something and all that stuff. And for example, this task that I've written down here, it is very just small task because it could have more plugins. Like when I want to compile my JavaScript code, then I need to compile the CoffeeScript to JavaScript. That is one plugin. Then I want to concatenate all my JS files to one file, and then I want to minify that file to one minified file. So that is one task that has about 3 or 4 plugins, and what is wrong with it that we are doing about 2 sets of unnecessary temporary files because every plugin needs to read some files from the disk and write it to somewhere else. So I need to compile CoffeeScript JavaScript, write it to the disk, read from the disk, and concatenate. And then, again, I need to read the concatenated file and minify it. So why is that? Why we could use... well, that was good for a long time. But obviously, there was something missing here. We could make it faster. And that was what one of the people thought of when they made Gulp in November, I think, in last year. That you could do it like it was a pipe. You take some code in it, you can get it through the Coffee compiler, Minify compiler, and all that stuff, and you then finally plug the files out without the unnecessary temporary files that are written down to the disk and slows the whole process. And well, we have that with Unix commands. For example, if you are Linux or Mac users, then we can just pipe the commands that we use in our shell. So if you're a Windows user, I can show you that with that example. Here I can find all the files in the directory, filter them so I can see only files with word grunt and then delete them. And that I do because I connect 3 commands, find, grep, and rm. And now imagine that we could do the same thing with frontend. Like we find all the files that I named .coffee, then we compile it through the Coffee compiler, put it into minifier, then maybe concatenate it and uglify, and finally I saved it to some file. That would be great. And well, enter the world of Gulp, because that is what it exactly does. Well, when in Grunt we configured our plugins separately, in Gulp we write our tasks, but in that way that we take some files, get it through to a pipe with some plugins, and then plug them out. And what is even better in Gulp, and I showed you that in a minute in a couple of examples, is that in Grunt you have to, for example, define exact order of your tasks. In Gulp you can say the dependencies of given task, and Gulp will care about the dependencies itself, and the other tasks that aren't dependent to each other, it will run them concurrently. In Grunt you can do it with Gulp Grunt concurrent plugin, but again it messes up the code of Grunt file much more, and the Gulp is just automated. And here is a task example in Gulp. A simple scripts task, which from some JavaScript files give me the final JavaScript file that I want to use on my production. And it has about 12 lines of code, I think, and I use about 9 plugins here. And still, it is clear. And even if you don't use Gulp yet, I think you can see what it is doing. Because firstly, it's taking some JavaScript files, then, then it's passing every file to JS hint. So if it has any errors that it will show me, then I can connect it to Y file and save it to some trajectory. And even if I can still minify that file, rename it, and again, save. And finally, I can notify my live reload server that that file have been changed. And it will be reloaded automatically in my browser. And what is more, Gulp API consists of just only 4 functions. One defines the task. You give a name and a function that does it, and maybe some dependencies if you want to. There is Gulp source and Gulp destination functions, which take some files, and the destination make you save those files in some folder. And Gulp watch is an utility function from Gulp that watches for all the changes on your files that you gave in the first argument, the path to them, and it runs the tasks that are defined there every time something is changed. And that's it. That's all. That's all you need to know about Gulp. And here I can show you a couple of examples of that API. Here I define a name task. Here is the dependency. What does it do? Well, if I want to run task name, then Gulp knows that he needs to make dependency task first, it needs to end, and then it will start the name task. And later on, it runs that function, and we can get the first argument, and we just instantiate or run that function when we just finish our task, like compilation or something or anything. We don't need to pass function to that task definition. We can just give dependency to it. So we can also make the alias of some function in that way. So here, a build task just consists of 2 tasks, which is compile.js and compile.css. And you can also define the default task. So when we just enter Gulp in command line, this is the default task that will be run. We have the Gulp source function, in which we can just pass a glob of files that we're going to use. And we use it in that way. When we define our task, then we use Gulp source to take some files, and then we can run some plugin on a pipe on it. So we run a pipe function, and we pass some plugin in it. So in this example, I will get all JavaScript files, and I will pass every one of them, of that files, to JS hint. And also, I need to return that function, because Gulp needs to know when that will be finished. And the task will be finished, validate JS. Also, here's the destination. It's something like plugin, because if you put it into the pipe, then it just saves the files into the folder. And even if you can still do something with those files, so you can save them and pass it to another plugin and save again. And also we have Gulp watch task. So when you have some task like watch, then we can just watch for some files and run a given set of tasks whenever something changes up there. And well, that's it. And how to start? Well, firstly, we of course need to install Node.js and Gulp. We can find it easily on those websites. It works on every system. We should install some Gulp plugins, like Gulp SAS, Gulp Coffee, whatever we want to use. I recommend seeing the official website for that. We create Gulp file and code it, and profit with finding Gulp. And how we do it? Well, we enter some projects directory. We should create package JSON file if we don't have it yet. So we run npm init. It will just run a simple command, so we'll have a file. And we can install Gulp and maybe some plugins in that directory. And we'll save it also to package JSON file. So it will be just in our project directory, not globally. And later on, we should code the Gulp file, JS file, so it should work. And then finally, we can run Gulp. And the question is, how should we code that file, Gulp file, JS file? Well, yeah, I showed you the API. So of course, this is not really, it's Node.js. So firstly, we need to require Gulp to find it, because it's not just globally available. We need to require it. But we added it with npm init and npm install, so it's available. And then we can define two tasks. Just a simple example. Default action of Gulp will be to build all the files and watch for changes. So we have two tasks, build and watch. And how we can code it? Well, we can say that build will consist of two tasks, compile.js and compile.css. We'll code them in a minute. We can also define some helpful variable for the paths of our scripts and style sheets. So they will be in just one place of our Gulp file. And in the watch file, we'll just watch for those paths and run a task whenever something changes. Is that clear? I hope so. And later on, we can define a task like compile CSS. And here, we also need to require another plugin, because Gulp doesn't do all this stuff. The plugins do that. Gulp is just a base for that. The same thing was with Grunt. And we define the compile CSS task. And in this task, we take some files from the style sheets. That variable here was just defined the slide before. So it's not magic. And we give it to a pipe and pass the Sass plugin into there. So every Sass file will be compiled into a CSS. And finally, we just pass it and save it to some directory. And that's the whole task. And we can do the same thing with CoffeeScript and JavaScript. We can also add some other stuff like looking for errors, running tests, or anything else. And that's it. I don't have much time, yeah? Right? 1 minute.
We have like just 2 minutes for questions. So.
Okay, not much. Okay, so I will show you the demo, but you can see it. It's the what I done here is that I have taken an Ionic Cordova Angular seed, which is a seed application for Angular and Cordova and Ionic framework, and I added a Gulp to it and added some tasks like compilation of Coffee, compilation of Sass. You can see that. It's on the GitHub if you want to. Also, Bespoke also has now Gulp, and the Gulp file is really clear, so I recommend to see in it. And well, that's it. I recommend you to automate your front-end development really fully, because all that stuff I said earlier, like compiling the files, minifying or something, it should be automated. Your developers, you should write code or maybe make some other things that need imagination. And compiling, you should have it automated. And why you should pick Gulp over Grunt? Well, as you will visit the Gulp.js file, first of all, it's really much faster. Well, you can see maybe it's not a huge difference, because maybe when in Gulp, a task will be run for 6 seconds, and Grunt, it will be 12 seconds. But if you develop your application and you change something every time, and you want to see the changes instantly in that browser, that those 5 seconds make a difference. And the tasks are run maximally concurrently. There are no unnecessary temporary files, so it's obviously a win. And also, Gulp file, I think it's much cleaner, so it's easier to maintain and just develop that Gulp file. And if you didn't understand most of it, or I were boring or anything else, I recommend here a couple of blog posts. The Gulp is still it was built in November last year, and I have given a presentation about it in March. So it's about a year that Gulp exists, and now it has a lot of plugins. I think it's stable, and it's really good to use in your production projects. I use it still from February, and it's been great, so really recommend it. Here's a couple of blog posts, really interesting, a couple of slideshows that are maybe better than mine, and also there is a screencast, and also a Gulp fiction that is a web browser UI editor, so you can write your Gulp file in a browser by just making an interaction with user interface, which is kind of cool, I think. And, well, that's it. Thanks.